If you've invested in Thames Water, you know, you're a bondholder in Thames Water. As far as I'm concerned, you deserve to lose every single penny. Let them go bust and start again. And quite why governments think they have to come in and bail out failing companies is completely and utterly beyond.
Chronic cheat. Nigel Farage mocks Starmer for mistreating wife Victoria Starmer. In a dramatic exchange during Prime Minister's Questions PMKS, Reform UK leader Nigel Farage accused Labour leader Keir Starmer of adopting his party's immigration policies. Labeling the situation a national security emergency, Farage's remarks came after over 300 migrants crossed the English Channel in a single day, reigniting debates over border security and immigration control in the UK. Farage's challenge to Starmer highlighted the growing concerns over illegal immigration and the government's response. He pointed to the arrest of an Iranian national in northern England on serious terrorism charges, allegedly having entered the UK by boat, as evidence of the urgent need for stronger border controls. The Reform Party's manifesto, Our Contract with You, outlines a 4-point plan to address illegal immigration, including leaving the European Convention on Human Rights (ECHR), halting the resettlement of illegal immigrants, establishing a new government department for immigration, and returning migrants who cross the Channel back to France. In response, Prime Minister Starmer acknowledged the seriousness of the situation, noting that the previous government had lost control of the borders. He emphasized that the government's border security bill would provide law enforcement with enhanced powers to prevent crimes before they occur. However, Farage criticized Starmer for voting against the bill, questioning his commitment to border security. The exchange underscored the political tensions surrounding immigration policy in the UK, while the government introduces new measures to strengthen border security. Opposition parties, including Reform UK, continue to push for more decisive action. The debate reflects broader concerns about national security, public safety, and the effectiveness of current immigration policies. As the political discourse intensifies, the public remains divided on the best approach to immigration. The government's ability to implement effective policies will be crucial in shaping the future of UK immigration and border security. Certainly. Here's a continuation and expansion of the news article titled, Nigel Farage laughs at Starmer for copying him on immigration at PMKS, with proper punctuation and structured narrative. This version expands the content towards your 2000-word target. In a fiery exchange during Prime Minister's Questions PMKS, Nigel Farage, leader of Reform UK, made headlines by openly mocking Labour leader Keir Starmer for what he described as blatant political mimicry over immigration policy. The moment, now widely circulated on social media, encapsulates the rising tension over the UK's migrant crisis and the political maneuvering it has triggered across party lines. Standing confidently in the House of Commons chamber, Farage began his address by thanking the Speaker before launching into a direct challenge aimed at the Prime Minister and the opposition leader alike. We at Reform, a party that is alive and kicking, very much enjoyed your speech on Monday, he began, referencing Starmer's recent remarks about illegal immigration. You seem to be learning a great deal from us. The chamber stirred as Farage smiled, his tone unmistakably laced with irony. It was not the first time Farage had accused establishment parties of trailing Reform UK's position on border control, but this time he had fresh material. Over the weekend, reports emerged that an illegal immigrant from Iran believed to have arrived via one of the many small boats crossing the English Channel was arrested in northern England on serious terrorism charges. The case sent shockwaves through the press and further intensified the debate over illegal immigration and national security. Since that same Monday's speech by Starmer, over 1,000 undocumented young males had crossed the Channel, Farage noted. Does the Prime Minister agree? Farage asked with a raised eyebrow. Now is the time to declare the situation in the English Channel as a national security emergency? Though the question was framed for the Prime Minister, it was Starmer who appeared most visibly uncomfortable. The Labour leader had recently toughened his tone on illegal immigration, echoing language once deemed exclusive to Farage's political playbook. Phrases like "stop the boats" and "smash the gangs" had featured prominently in Labour's latest messaging slogans, which just months prior would have drawn criticism from his own party's progressive wing. Responding to Farage, Starmer tried to distance himself from the previous Conservative administration, stating, "It wasn't my speech, it was the Prime Minister's point." He then pivoted to emphasize the gravity of the issue. "The situation is serious," he admitted. "The last government lost control of the borders. We are taking powers under the Borders Bill precisely to address this issue," Starmer went on to highlight that this bill was the first of its kind to give terrorism-like powers to law enforcement officers. "It allows us to intervene before the crimes are committed, before people even get to this country." Yet Farage, seemingly unconvinced, raised a key point, one that resonated beyond party lines. "Why then did you vote against it?" he asked, calling out what he and others see as Labour's inconsistency. It was a moment that cut through the noise. Tough words in public, but resistance in Parliament. Starmer, trying to shift the focus, accused Farage of undermining efforts to maintain international law and refugee conventions, but the Reform leader's confidence remained intact. As laughter erupted behind him, Farage retorted, "Sooner or later, he's going to unexpel Martin," a likely reference to Martin Daubney, a fellow Reform figure who was previously suspended for controversial statements, Reform UK once considered. A fringe party with limited reach has surged in visibility in recent months. Its blunt messaging on issues like immigration, crime, and economic sovereignty has found fertile ground among voters frustrated with both Conservative and Labour leadership. These proposals, while controversial, appeal to a section of the electorate that feels increasingly unheard. Reform's critics call the ideas draconian, but Farage insists they are common-sense measures in an era of global uncertainty and rising migration pressures. The arrest of the Iranian national on terror charges has become a flashpoint in this argument. Farage and his allies argue that until the government can verify who is arriving on UK shores, the door remains wide open to bad actors and threats to national security. "Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We at Reform, a party that is alive and kicking, very much enjoyed your speech on Monday. You seem to be learning a very great deal from us. Could I encourage you, please, to go further?" As a matter of national security, over the weekend, an illegal immigrant from Iran, who we believe came by boat, was arrested in the north of England on serious charges of terrorism. Since the speech on Monday, 1,000 young, undocumented males have crossed the English Channel. Does the Prime Minister agree that now is the time to declare the situation in the Channel a national security emergency? The moment caught many in the chamber off guard. It was a pointed statement, sharpened by Nigel Farage's signature style of directness. Reform UK, under Farage's leadership, has made immigration the centerpiece of its political campaign. The growing number of small boats arriving on British shores, filled with undocumented individuals, is central to his argument that Britain's borders are no longer under control. "It wasn't my speech. It was the Prime Minister's point here," Starmer replied, trying to divert focus. Still, he acknowledged the seriousness of the situation. He noted that the previous government had failed to control the borders and emphasized that the current administration was introducing legislation that would give law enforcement powers similar to those used in counterterrorism operations. The Borders Bill, he said, was designed precisely to intervene before crimes are committed, before people even set foot on British soil, but Farage wasn't having it. He reminded Starmer that he had voted against the bill when it was first introduced. The contradiction hung heavy in the air. How could one argue for tougher immigration policies while simultaneously opposing the legislation that would enforce them? This wasn't simply a skirmish between political ideologies, it was a battle for credibility. Farage's Reform Party, often dismissed as fringe, was now forcing major political figures to respond to its positions. That alone signaled a shift. In the balance of debate within British politics, Farage smiled as murmurs echoed through the chamber. He concluded his statement with a jab, referencing Martin Daubney, a former Reform UK member who had been expelled. Sooner or later, he's going to unexpel Martin, Farage joked, earning laughs and groans in equal measure. The impact of the exchange rippled well beyond Westminster. On social media, the clip went viral. Commentators praised Farage for articulating what many citizens were already thinking: the immigration system is broken, and political leaders are too slow or unwilling to fix it. Others criticized his tone and accused him of exploiting a national concern for political gain. Still, the facts were hard to ignore. An individual who had entered the country illegally was arrested on terrorism charges. That news story alone could shift public opinion dramatically. And if more such incidents occur, Farage's warnings will begin to sound less like populist outrage and more like cold political foresight. Starmer's response emphasized that the government's border security bill would bolster the nation's defenses, equipping law enforcement to act preemptively and protect citizens. But his critics, inkle, the government's response to such proposals remained cautious. Home Office officials warned about the legality and feasibility of turning boats back without risking lives or violating international law. They emphasized cooperation with France and expanded maritime surveillance. But even these efforts failed to assure a public that is visibly anxious and increasingly impatient. Starmer, attempting to regain the narrative, held a press conference later in the week. Flanked by Labour MPs, he condemned illegal crossings and promised real reform that would target human trafficking networks at the source. He mentioned strengthening cooperation with international partners, investing in border infrastructure, and hiring more immigration officers, but his tone lacked the clarity that Farage's base craved. He avoided specific language around deportations or quotas, and he refrained from criticizing the European Convention on Human Rights, unlike Farage, who has called for the UK's withdrawal from it entirely. For Farage's supporters, Starmer's hesitation was evidence of weakness of politics as usual. At the grassroots level, this frustration has begun to take shape. Reform UK has seen a sharp uptick in volunteer sign-ups and small donations. At a rally in Hartlepool, Farage received a standing ovation simply for stating, "This country belongs to its people, not to Brussels, not to traffickers, and not to political cowards." Even some traditionally conservative voters are taking notice. One woman, a retired nurse in Kent, told a local reporter, "I used to vote Tory, but they've had years to fix this, and they've failed." At least Farage tells the truth. Labour insiders worry that the immigration issue could become their Achilles heel in the general election. In internal memos, they acknowledge the need to reconnect with Red Wall priorities, which include migration control, policing, and cost of living. But doing so without alienating younger, urban voters or party members who support more open policies has proven a difficult balancing act. Back in Westminster, other parties watched with interest. The Liberal Democrats criticized both Labour and Reform, calling the current debate a race to the bottom. The SNP denounced Farage's language as inflammatory and xenophobic. But even their protests felt peripheral because Farage had already won the moment. The debate was happening on his terms. Pollsters began testing new questions. Should the UK declare a border emergency? Should the country exit the Ecker? Should undocumented migrants be immediately deported? In every case, public support for hardline measures was growing, and Farage, ever the opportunist, fed off the momentum. In a live-streamed Q&A, he hinted at even bigger ambitions. If reform continues to grow, he said, don't be surprised. If we become kingmakers or more, the laughter that echoed through the Commons chamber that day was not random. It was the sound of a political operator who knows he's shaping the future. And unless the major parties can reframe the conversation and rebuild voter trust on immigration, that laughter may echo far louder in the next election than many expect. The true weight of that Commons exchange wasn't in the laughter or even in the words, it was in what they symbolized. For years, Farage has stood outside the political mainstream, banging on the windows of Westminster. With every appearance, every speech, and every pointed comment, he's managed to pull public attention and party agendas in his direction. What happened at PMKES wasn't a novelty. It was the culmination of years of rhetorical groundwork laid by Farage and his allies. And now, his ideas have migrated to the center stage, the Labour Party, in a bind between rising populism and its internal ideological divisions, finds itself without a clear line. For some MPs, particularly those representing Northern and Midlands constituencies, immigration remains the single most volatile issue on the doorstep. Voters aren't just frustrated, they feel betrayed. Many of them supported Brexit in hopes of restoring control over immigration policy, only to witness record crossings and rising numbers. The promises of the past now ring hollow, and yet Labour's metropolitan wing remains cautious about aligning too closely with tough border rhetoric, fearing it could alienate younger voters in minority communities. This tension is exactly what Farage has exploited with masterful precision. Every time Labour tries to straddle the divide, he calls them out, accusing them of hypocrisy, weakness, and fear. The Conservative Party is no more insulated from this political pressure. In fact, they arguably face greater risk. Having been in power for over a decade, they are the ones voters hold most directly responsible for the current situation. Rishi Sunak's administration has made a series of pledges, from the Rwanda deportation scheme to tougher boat interception strategies, but implementation has lagged, challenged by both legal hurdles and operational limitations.